At different points of the territory under the control of the Nazi regime, structures, artifacts and mechanisms whose existence had remained hidden began to be found. Some were buried underground, others hidden in remote facilities, carefully isolated from the rest of the world. The most striking thing was not only the individual development of each one, but also the variety of fields they covered, from experimental weapons to technologies that seemed ahead of their time. The places where they were found showed signs of recent activity, with remains of materials, machinery and tools that evidenced complex processes. Everything seemed to be part of a network of projects that were kept in reserve, with objectives that still raise questions today. What was really sought with each of these inventions, and how far would they have gone if no one had discovered them? In the last months of the war, when Allied pilots patrolled the European skies, they began to notice something new gliding among the clouds, faster than anything seen until then. These were aircraft that did not rely on propellers or conventional engines, but on a completely different type of propulsion. The first to appear was the Messerschmitt Me 262, considered the first operational jet fighter. Its development had begun several years earlier, but technical complications and high-level decisions had delayed its deployment. Once in service, its speed surpassed any enemy aircraft by a wide margin. It reached more than 850 kilometers per hour and was armed with 4 large-caliber cannons. In combat, it could attack a bomber formation and disappear before they could react. Despite the limitations of its engines, which wore out quickly, the aircraft demonstrated that the concept of aerial combat was about to change. That change was even more evident when the Allies entered German territory and found a design that resembled nothing known. It had been developed by the Horten brothers in hidden facilities in eastern Germany. It was an aircraft with a completely integrated wing without fuselage or tail, with a smooth profile and shapes designed to reduce its radar detection. The Horten Ho 229 was not a project on paper. Some prototypes had flown. One of them was almost finished when American troops found it. It had jet engines already mounted, integrated controls, and retractable landing gear like modern aircraft. Its flight capability was still a matter of testing, but its design was so distinct from others that it was immediately classified as a priority find. The aircraft was sent to the United States for analysis. Technicians and specialists examined it thoroughly and concluded that it was the first serious attempt to create a stealth aircraft. Some parts were made of composite materials and special coatings. Although it did not actively participate in combat, its later influence was clear. The tailless wing designs that were developed later, such as the North American stealth bomber, took up several elements from that prototype found in a destroyed German hangar. While these advanced designs were being analyzed, another discovery caught attention for completely different reasons. It was not a fast craft or an undetectable way of flying, but a system that allowed fighting in the dark. The Zielgerät 1229, also known as Vampire, was a night vision device that could be mounted on rifles. It worked using an infrared light projector that was not visible to the human eye, but which could be detected by a special sight. The set included a power source that the soldier had to carry on his back. It was heavy and limited, but it allowed aiming and shooting at night with unprecedented precision. Elite units that received these equipment used them at strategic points on the front, especially in ambushes or night defense. Larger versions of these systems were also mounted on armored vehicles. Some tanks, like the Panther, were equipped with infrared searchlights and night sights for the main cannon. Other accompanying vehicles carried more powerful headlights to illuminate large areas. The idea was to coordinate night attacks without the enemy being able to see anything. Although its use was limited and the war was already lost, technical development was several years ahead. After the surrender, the devices found were carefully studied. The basic ideas of the system would be resumed years later by powers seeking to operate in lightless conditions. But if these devices showed what German technology could achieve, what the Allies found in the streets and ruins of the cities revealed something different: how the regime used every last human resource. As they advanced towards the heart of the Reich, they began to encounter resistance from armed civilians, teenagers uniformed with armbands, and elderly people with old rifles. It was the Volkssturm, a militia created in the last months of 1944 by direct orders from Hitler. With the regular army collapsing, it was ordered to recruit men between 16 and 60 years of age who were not already in service. Many had no training, no experience, not even adequate equipment. Some wore old uniforms, others only a black ribbon with the party symbol. Allied reports began to speak of clashes with barely trained young people, sometimes armed with individual rocket launchers hidden among debris. On other occasions, these were older people shooting from destroyed buildings. The problem was not so much the effectiveness of these units, which in many cases could barely resist, but the symbol they represented. They showed that the regime was willing to use anyone, even children, to prolong the war. It was the crudest expression of fanaticism. The enemy was not only in trenches, but in houses, in schools, in parks, transformed into a combatant by obligation or conviction. Some Volkssturm prisoners recounted, in the days after their capture, that they had been forced to participate. Others said they had volunteered. Some carried portraits of the Führer protected as personal items. Many did not know how to use the weapon they carried. Allied units that encountered this resistance did not consider it a serious tactical threat, but rather a sign of the depth of indoctrination. It was not just a military war. It was a psychological, cultural, total war. The Volkssturm did not change the outcome of the war, but it forced a rethinking of what it meant to defeat an enemy that did not differentiate between army and population. At the same time that untrained civilians were being called upon to resist on land, the naval sphere faced a different but equally critical reality. The German command began to notice that its underwater strategy was falling behind. Submarines that had caused havoc in the Atlantic during the first years of the conflict were now detected, pursued, and destroyed with greater ease by Allied systems. Radar, sonar, and air escort had reduced the effectiveness of traditional U-boats. Faced with this situation, a new design was promoted that was not just an improvement, but a complete technical leap. Thus was born the Type 21, a submarine that was not meant to operate on the surface, but rather to remain submerged almost permanently, with silent engines, a hydrodynamic structure, and greater underwater autonomy. Its submerged speed exceeded 17 knots, which made it the fastest of its type. It was equipped with powerful electric motors, larger batteries than any previous model, and an assisted breathing system that allowed the diesel engines to be used while remaining at periscopic depth. Its exterior shape did not imitate that of a ship, but was designed to move efficiently underwater. It had 6 torpedo tubes in the bow, a reloading system that allowed another full discharge to be prepared in a few minutes, and advanced passive sensors that allowed detection without emitting its own signals. The most striking thing was not only its performance, but the way it was built. Instead of being assembled in a single shipyard, its parts were manufactured in modular sections by different plants, to then be joined in main ports like Hamburg or Danzig. This production method sought to speed up times and protect construction from bombings, although it generated assembly complications and quality variations. Of more than 100 units that were launched, only a few managed to be ready for operation before the end. One of them, the U-2511, went out on a mission, but received orders to stop its attack upon learning of the surrender. When the Allies inspected the ports where finished or in-process units were anchored, they were surprised by what they saw. Naval engineers examined the blueprints, internal distribution, electrical system, valves, and the type of steel used. They discovered that it was not simply an improvement. The Type 21 represented a new way of understanding submarine warfare. It was no longer based on appearing, firing, and disappearing, but on remaining hidden, moving silently, attacking from below, and staying out of reach of any aerial or surface detection. Its autonomy, fast reloading capability, and internal configuration allowed it to operate for days without surfacing. It was a platform designed for a type of warfare that had not yet begun. The captured submarines were sent to different countries. One was taken to the United States and used for testing, receiving the name of USS N-300. Another was transferred to the Soviet Union, where it served as the basis for later models that would give rise to its most advanced classes. The internal technologies, compartment distribution, double hull structure, and automatic loading system directly influenced subsequent designs in both the USSR and the West. The navies of France and the United Kingdom also integrated concepts derived from the Type 21, such as extended autonomy and a more functional interior design. At another point on the map, what awaited was not a technological innovation, but the brutal evidence of how far the logic of extermination could extend. When Soviet troops crossed the gates of Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, they not only found collapsed structures and skeletal figures, but also material evidence of a killing machine that surpassed any known notion of crime. Among blackened ruins, sealed chambers, empty canisters of a cyanide-based pesticide, and calcined remains of people, the technical center of systematic murder was exposed. Within that panorama, the gas chambers directly represented how elimination had become a routine task of the state, with numerical precision and factory logic. The accounts of those who were forced to participate in that process, the Jewish prisoners of the Sonderkommando, served to understand how this tool worked from both a mechanical and emotional point of view. Many of them knew they would be eliminated after completing their work, but even so, they left traces, hidden papers, words spoken to other inmates, or later confessions. Their accounts did not speak of individual executions, but of serial production. People were guided by deception to an enclosed place, with false showers and wooden benches. They were asked to leave their clothes tidy and remember their hook number. Once the doors were closed, Zyklon B was introduced through openings in the ceiling or sides. Upon contact with the air, it released a lethal gas that asphyxiated in a few minutes. Some survivors mentioned agonizing screams, nail marks on the walls, mothers embracing their children. Others, however, spoke of the absolute silence that remained when the gas had already taken effect. After the agony, the stillness was total. Upon ventilating the space and opening the doors, the Sonderkommando entered to remove the bodies. The work had to be swift and without emotion. Hair was cut, gold teeth were extracted, corpses were arranged by size to facilitate the cremation process. The place was not to remain empty for long. There was another line waiting outside. The Germans had refined the construction of murder. In Auschwitz-Birkenau, the chambers had been located underground. Victims were led directly from the train to transition zones that mimicked sanitary spaces. There was music, calm voices, even men dressed as nurses. Everything was planned to avoid reactions that would interrupt the procedure. In the post-war trials, some engineers, doctors, and supervisors tried to justify their role as mere subordinates. Others, like the camp's supreme commander Rudolf Höss, frankly described the technical details. How many people fit, how long the gas took, how many bodies could be incinerated in one day. His tone, without emotion or remorse, showed a mind that understood crime as an office task. For the Allied soldiers who entered the camps, what they saw surpassed any assumption. At first, some officers doubted the testimonies, but upon entering sites like Dachau or Mauthausen and seeing with their own eyes the ovens, the stacked personal belongings, the images, the remains, they understood the magnitude of what had happened. What had been considered rumor or propaganda exaggeration was real. The groups in charge of documentation began to record, photograph, and archive every corner. All of that would later be used as direct evidence. Experts in poisons, structural engineers, and specialists also participated, studying the pesticide remains, the ventilation systems, the external locking devices, and the organization of the place. They confirmed that these were not bathrooms or warehouses, but spaces designed to take lives efficiently. Unlike other forms of execution, such as shootings or hangings, death by gas in an enclosed space and without visible executioners had something that made it more difficult to assimilate. It was a form of annihilation without blood, without contact, without a face. Death as a chemical phenomenon. The problem was no longer just moral, it was also technical. It had been demonstrated that science, planning, and logistics could be used to eliminate people on a large scale without hesitation. Although over the years groups emerged that tried to deny everything, alleging technical failures or differences between accounts. The quantity of documents, confessions, and coincidences among survivors debunked any attempt at concealment. The gas chambers operated every day. They eliminated hundreds of thousands. The majority were Jews, but there were also Roma people, homosexuals, Red Army prisoners and political opponents. Shortly after, another revelation left the Allies speechless. It was no longer about extermination, but a threat from the sky. The appearance of a rocket that fell without sound or warning, leaving no room for any defense, changed the very concept of how conflicts were waged. That weapon, called V2, was developed by a team led by a young engineer in a secret base in northern Germany. The apparatus was 14 meters long, weighed more than 10 tons, and could transport 1 ton of explosive charge at speeds exceeding 5,000 kilometers per hour, leaving the atmosphere and returning in freefall. It was the first true ballistic trajectory projectile. There was no way to stop it. Its impact arrived before the sound. Defensive logic became obsolete. The British detected the first effects at the end of 1944. There were enormous craters, unexplained damage, no planes in sight. Initially, the English authorities attributed it to gas accidents to avoid panic. But it was soon learned that unknown technology had been put into practice. Although an attempt had been made to destroy the base, where they were developed with a massive aerial attack, production was moved to underground factories where prisoners worked in extreme conditions. It was in those hidden facilities that the final rockets were assembled. Despite not being precise, and their direct effect not changing the battlefronts, their mere existence transformed the war into something new. Cities were attacked without warning. The idea that an enemy could strike from afar without exposing themselves altered all defense plans. While some sought to stop them with sabotage or bombings, others began to think about what would come next. When Soviet troops advanced and occupied factories and installations, they captured some prototypes and part of the equipment. On the other side, the Americans took the responsible engineers to work for them in secret. Among them, the main creator of the project, who would later lead the team that built the rocket that put the first man on the moon. While the Soviets replicated the captured models to use them in their own tests, Allied technicians studied every blueprint, every engine, and every calculation. The same formulas that served to launch a projectile served to calculate the orbit of a satellite. In this way, a weapon of destruction also became the basis for space technology. While ordinary people remembered these rockets as silent punishments that appeared without warning, scientists understood that the future had just begun. What impressed most was not only its range, but the speed with which Germany had come so far. If something like this had been created in such a short time, the question of what would come next was inevitable. That question arose again when the Allies began to find places that were not on the maps. In mountainous or forested areas, hidden entrances appeared leading to enormous underground facilities. There, among long tunnels, loading platforms, electrical generators, precision parts and still-chained skeletons, rocket parts were manufactured. These were not improvised shelters, but constructions planned in advance. They had air systems, isolated test chambers, final assembly areas, and even blueprints for new models. All of this was done with prisoner labor, in subhuman conditions. In some tunnels, remnants of jet planes assembled underground were found. Even parts that seemed to be part of a vehicle designed to leave the planet were discovered. One of the main centers was an old mountain adapted as a secret factory. Upon entering, technicians were astonished by the mix of brutality and precision. While cities were being razed, production lines continued to operate there in the bowels of the earth. It was like seeing the future built with the most savage methods of the past. In other more remote places, troops stumbled upon tunnels carved into stone that seemed endless, with armored structures and vacuum-sealed rooms. Some believed they were shelters for leaders. Others thought that more dangerous weapons were being prepared. Everything fueled the sensation that the war could have continued from below, out of sight, with unimaginable tools. To prevent this technology from falling into enemy hands, high commanders ordered the urgent recovery of any object, blueprint, or scientist. It was not just a matter of ending the war, but of securing what could provide an advantage in the next one. And so, amidst that bewilderment, a final surprise appeared, much smaller but equally impactful. In a corner of Europe, experts came across something that seemed to have come from an idea barely imagined at the time. Helicopters that actually flew. Not models or prototypes, but functional apparatuses that had crossed mountains, taken off from ships, and performed patrolling or rescue tasks. One of those models had two large rotors located on each side, which gave it stability. It could transport 1 ton, exceed 180 kilometers per hour, and operate in difficult terrain. Another, smaller one, was designed for observation from ships. It had synchronized rotors that avoided the use of a tail propeller, could lift off from reduced decks, and return without a runway. It was agile, fast, and silent. Some were already being used in real missions. When Allied pilots saw the remnants, they did not understand how something so advanced had been built without their knowledge. The technicians who reviewed its parts said that, compared to their own models, it was far ahead. Blueprints were recovered, those responsible were interrogated, and even some apparatuses were reconstructed for testing. It was not a gigantic machine or a definitive weapon, but it showed that war could also be fought from the air, without speed or altitude, simply suspended in the sky, observing, transporting, or escaping. It was another way of understanding combat, a way that until that moment seemed impossible. In the last stages of the war, Allied commands began to receive reports about a new type of German weaponry that did not follow the known rules of conventional artillery. It was not about bombs launched from airplanes nor free-falling rockets, but about projectiles that were guided remotely as they descended towards their target. The best known was the Fritz X, an anti-ship bomb that looked common at first glance, but which contained control surfaces and a radio guidance system that allowed the operator to modify its trajectory after being launched. It was used for the first time in combat in 1943, and its impact was immediate. One of the targets was the Italian battleship Roma, which sank after being hit with precision, causing the death of more than 1,000 sailors. They also seriously damaged other ships of the Allied fleets, such as the British Warspite or the American Savannah. Along with the Fritz X appeared the Henschel 293, a projectile with wings, an engine, and remote guidance, which could be visually directed as it descended. It had less penetration capability than the first, but it was effective against lighter ships. In both cases, guidance was done from the launching aircraft, following the trajectory by means of a rear flare. Although they required optimal conditions and well-trained operators, they introduced a completely new way of attacking, from a distance, with real-time direction, and without the need to repeat shots. For the first time, it was demonstrated that a single guided projectile could put a complete ship out of service. The effect of these weapons on naval planning was immediate, but what the Allies found shortly after on land left them even more surprised. Buried in northern France, near the coast, they discovered a reinforced concrete installation with enormous cannons pointing towards the English Channel. They were part of the V3 project, a weapon designed to continuously bombard London without the need for airplanes or rockets. Its design included a tube of more than 100 meters, with lateral chambers that activated in sequence as the projectile advanced, accelerating it with a series of coordinated explosions. Each piece could launch hundreds of projectiles per day at more than 150 kilometers away. The idea was to create a constant and automatic bombardment from a fixed position, protected underground. The construction of the site began in 1943 with forced labor and under maximum security. When the British learned of the project, it became a priority target. After several failed bombings, they decided to employ a new type of penetrating bomb known as tallboy, designed to penetrate deep layers of concrete. One of them managed to damage the main tunnels, collapsing part of the structure just as the first tests were about to begin. Although the weapon never came to function against London, some of its components were transferred to Germany and used in limited bombings on the Western Front. The projectiles found by Allied forces, with their elongated shapes and segmented design, did not resemble anything in known arsenals. However, German ideas did not stop at the use of explosives. In the midst of despair, they began to experiment with a concept that seemed closer to laboratory theories than to real applications, firing projectiles using electricity. The electromagnetic cannon they were secretly developing worked without gunpowder. It used extreme electrical current to propel projectiles at hypersonic speeds, utilizing a system of rails and magnetic fields. Although the theory was known, Applying it required enormous energy levels, reinforced structures and materials capable of resisting heat and friction. Engineers faced constant failures, deformation of parts wear with each shot, electrical risks. Despite that, in the last months of the conflict, they managed to test some prototypes. Reports from the Allies who occupied the laboratories where the trials were conducted described cables as thick as human arms, semicircular structures, impact marks on armored materials, and documents with detailed calculations. Some ideas even mentioned launching objects into space or reaching long-distance targets without the need for explosives. Although there were no operational results, the plans and remains found showed that the development was more advanced than believed. American experts sent all recovered material to research centers for further analysis. While these large-scale weapons occupied the attention of analysts, another smaller, seemingly simple piece proved equally transformative. The Sturmgewehr 44 assault rifle combined in a single design the precision of a rifle with the rate of fire of an automatic weapon. Until then, soldiers used bolt-action rifles or inaccurate submachine guns. The STG-44 used an intermediate-range cartridge, allowed semi-automatic or continuous firing, and had a 30-round magazine. It was first delivered to units on the Eastern Front, where soldiers confirmed its effectiveness, especially in urban combat or in areas of dense vegetation. Its ability to maintain sustained fire without losing mobility or precision changed the way of fighting at an individual level. The weapon was developed in secret under false names to prevent its cancellation. Hitler initially opposed its production, but after receiving reports from the front, he eventually approved its manufacture. It is estimated that more than 400,000 units were built. Although they arrived late and were not enough to reverse the course of the war, its design was copied, adapted, and became the reference model for future generations of assault rifles worldwide. The Allies who captured specimens studied them in detail. British intelligence categorized it as the greatest advance in light weaponry since the machine gun. At the end of the war, what the Allies found were not only weapons or installations, but a technical structure that had advanced on multiple fronts. Each discovery, however simple or complex, showed how far military development had been taken. Some systems were already in use, others in an experimental phase. But all responded to the same logic, anticipating the next step in combat. Guided weapons, rockets, submarines, submersible for long periods, and assault rifles were not isolated exceptions, but part of a sustained effort. Many of these designs were studied, copied, and adapted by the victorious powers. Their effect was not limited to the ongoing conflict, but marked the beginning of future technologies. The recovered documents, plans, and prototypes not only explained how they worked, but also what had been attempted to be built. The legacy of these findings did not remain on the front, but in what came next, when other wars and other armies took up what had been started there.